Thanks again.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. I hope you can all hear me correctly. Thank you, Matthew, for the presentation. It was great. I'll try to keep up the level. Yes, I will. I hope you see my screen. No, should be okay. I think if I don't hear from you, I'll consider that you see my screen. Yes, so we are Euros for Docs. We are a French association who's first started in France and then now is doing a European project. So that's what I will present. And for this, I will need to speak a bit about the European situation, which I think is what you want. But first, who are we? So we are Euros for Docs, a French association. Basically, in France, we have a Sunshine Act. We had the Sunshine Act in 2011, just 1 year after the US. The stories are very similar between the US and France in the sense that in both cases, the Sunshine Act follows a health scandal, and specifically a scandal about one drug in particular. So
sobre una droga en particular, así que no sé si ustedes han escuchado esa historia.
Medicament drug who was caused the scandal, and then and another number of things, but then that made the Sunshine Act in the US, and in France it was the mediator. But the stories are exactly similar. Basically, the side effects of a medicament were ignored, and then afterwards the parliament investigated on it and realized that there were a very high level of links between this pharma company and basically doctors and politicians. And so they introduced a transparency law to try to limit these effects. And in France, so the law was voted in 2011. In 2014, there was the first data published. But it had a lot of practical problems, especially very bad accessibility. So at the beginning, basically the state was only putting a CSV file on the website and updating it once a day, but there was absolutely no public searchable sites for citizens. And also the data was very incomplete, which was then challenged by a lot of French associations that deal with this question about pharma industry influence in the health sector. So that was corrected mostly in 2016. The data is now more complete. It includes like the contract.
La información está mucho más completa que en ese año 2016. E incluso la industria y los doctores pueden entrar y no.
Lastly, so there was only the raw data at the beginning. Then they did a website, but the website had only basically a search function. So you could enter the name of a doctor and see if they had links with the industry. But you could not have any kind of statistical overview. You could not see basically, for example, if 1 year the levels of payments had increased or which category had increased, etc. So basically, we created the association in 2018 to try to basically make the use of the data that was already there better. And we basically, on the technique, it's a technical association, I would say. It's an association that just is trying to solve this technical problem. So what we did is every day we take the data that is published by the state, and we just clean it a bit, and we basically have a website where you can, of course, search by doctor, but where you also have dashboards per company, and where you can basically have an overview of the data. And basically, our site is easier to use than the official one, although it's exactly the same data. And so it exists now since 2018. So in between, we have been used by, the website has been used by a number of newspapers and used a number of journalistic investigations. It was used in quite interesting cases. For example, there were doctors that were together signing an opinion piece in a newspaper, and then other newspapers investigated the list of doctors that were signing this opinion piece and realized that they were all receiving payment from the same pharma company, and actually that they were doing this job on behalf of a pharma company and really influenced by, in this case, it was a lobbying action, basically. And another very interesting use that was made of it, was done by local newspapers in France. So different so city newspapers mostly, and they all investigated the doctors that are well known in their town. So usually maybe the head of the health university or the head of the hospital, and they looked at their ties with the industry. And because when you get more local, you see more the stories that are behind the links. The stories were actually very interesting. And one last use of our website, which is more surprising, is that now the authority for health, or the health ministry, when they want to hire experts on certain subjects, or when they want to hire experts as their employees, they use our website to check the links of interest, which is very interesting because it means that that's something that they were not doing before. I mean, maybe they were doing it before our website, but definitely before the Sunshine Act, they were not doing that, or maybe they had other ways to do that, but probably very inefficient. So probably they were doing it much less in practice. So that's a change that is we find interesting. In the last few months, we have had, I mean, in 2 years, we have gained little by little, I think, a bit of interest. I think now we are well known in the fields of the journalists that work on this project. We are still very not well known from the public opinion, but that's anyway not our objective. But since the COVID crisis, there has been a lot of attention on the ties between the public speaking figures. So typically doctors that come to say what they think about, the lockdown measures and stuff like that. Investigate and report on the links of each of this figure. And another use that was made in this period, so this is very much more related to the French context, but in France we had Professor Raoult. I don't know if it was so well known in Chile, but he was one guy that said he had a drug that was working really well against COVID, and produced series of scientific studies that were then attacked because they were very low quality. And then he was, but he became very mediatic figure. And then at some point he started to basically say that he was using a website to check on the links of the doctors that were advising Macron's government. And this led for us in the peak of the users coming to our website, and yeah, so I mean, it was quite impressive. For us, it's both a good and a bad thing, so to say, because on the good side, definitely the people are more and more informed about the fact that there is links of interest between the industry and between doctors, and they see it as a problem. And I think globally the education of the public on this topic is going up, so that's good. On the other end, in this case, I mean, this doctor, so Dr. Raoult, was attacked because his scientific method were not correct. And his defense was to say, yeah, but look, the doctors that are advising Macron are corrupted. And I mean, it's a very bad defense, because it's not, of course, both are not related. And it's definitely interesting to put in question the links of the doctors that are advising Macron, but it should not be an answer to a critic on the science. So that was for our association. I mean, if I want to speak a bit more broadly about the effect of the Sunshine Act in France, actually, it's the feeling is that what Matthew said is very can really much apply in France too. It didn't solve all the problems about the links of interest between the industry and the doctors, definitely not. Also, because now we have data, we can see that it's not lowering, or it's lowering the total amount of payment is lowering, but very so little that it's almost not measurable. But still it has a lot of number of interests, so as in the media, in the research, and for policymaker. And in France, one of the good examples that we can see is that this year was published a new law that's called the anti-gift law. So trying to, instead of working on transparency, trying to really limit what is allowed in terms of gift and in terms of invitation for doctors. And this law is definitely much more ambitious than what was possible 5 years ago. So I think there is a cultural shift that is taking place. It is slow. We are still working on it, but definitely things are changing a bit, at least in the spirit. Okay, so now let's broaden a bit the horizon and speak about Europe. Basically, in Europe, so we have to look a bit at the history. As we said, so there was the Sunshine Act in the US, and there was the Sunshine Act in France. There was actually not written there, but one in Portugal in 2013, I think, and one in Denmark early 2014. And so each country, I mean, a number of countries voted laws about transparency in the same spirit of increasing the transparency and in the end, ultimately reducing the links of interest of the industry. And there was in Europe a reaction of the European lobby. So the FPI, so I'll talk a bit about it. So I'll explain what it is. The FPI is the trade group. It's the lobby that represents all the national lobby of the pharma industry in each country. So, and basically when they saw this kind of cultural change about transparency, about payments to doctor, they tried to, I would say, counterattack. Of course, they would definitely not name it like that, but that's really how we see things, that they launched their own transparency initiative. But from our point of view, this is basically a damage control operation. And it's actually a sociological concept called regulatory capture.
Sociológico para poder recapturar, digamos, la atención no podemos hacer que esto no suceda a través de una ley, y porque no podemos estar involucrados en el proceso de escritura de estas leyes.
Stronger law that then passes to not appear as opposed to transparency. So in this case, they launched their transparency initiative in 2013, but then the data was available from 2014 on. And it has a number of problems, which is, from our point of view, not surprising. Mostly that's, so it's their own initiative. So basically, each company is freely releasing the transparency information, and also they basically try to make it as little usable as possible. And I will detail that in a bit. But one of the biggest problem is that they ask for the consent of the doctors, usually. So basically, for example, in Germany, each doctor is able to say if they want to have their name published in these disclosure documents. And the vast majority in Germany of the doctors refuse to have their name published. And of course, well, there is a high suspicion that the ones that are actually conflicts of interest are the ones that are refusing to say their names. So it's transparency only on the non-problematic stuff, I would say, which is a bit, of course, in its very nature, not satisfying. And another problem is that so the data is scattered in different disclosure documents from each company. And the last big problem is that it excludes the research and development payments, which are more than half. So actually they do disclose them, but only the aggregate sum. So yeah, and I'll come back to the case of Belgium at the end. So basically in Europe, we have a situation where some countries have a Sunshine Act. So France, Denmark, Portugal, Belgium. And in this case, so the pharma company is then basically sending the data to the health ministry, who then publishes it on a portal. And we have then all the other countries, we are in this FPI initiatives. And then there are two cases in, for example, UK and Ireland, there are some others. The national lobby of the pharma industry has made a platform. So for UK, it's called Disclosure UK. And then you can go on it and then look, like search for the name of a doctor and access all the data directly. So here, at least you can search at one place for all the data. In the other countries, it's not the case, and then you'll see that it's very transparency only in the words, but not in the acts, because basically each pharma company publishes a PDF on their website, and with that they say it's good. We've complied with our obligation. We disclose the links of interest, and we are done. Of course, it makes it totally impossible for patients to actually see the links of interest, because they would have to go to, I don't know, 50 or 60 companies to see what are the links of interest of their doctor. So basically, this is what our new project is about. It is to take this data that is scattered among many sources, so all the PDFs on all the websites of the industry in the country who are not centralized, all the centralized websites elsewhere, and basically to list all these data sources, to download them all automatically, to harmonize everything, and to put everything in a unique database. And the idea is to make this database available to journalists, to NGOs, to researchers, public authorities if they want it. And I mean, actually we do have the data now, but it's not really announced yet. I'll speak a bit about the next step in the end, but basically, the idea is to centralize the data. So again, it's a project that is where what we do is rather technical, but that makes sense because our association is, I mean, we are IT engineers basically. So right now we have 9 countries, and very soon I think 11. So I think we are very happy with the scale, because it's something that started really in March this year. So it went pretty well. So I forgot to say, I mean, in the project, we also have data from the countries where there are Sunshine Acts. So, and then the format is a bit changed so that we can have everything under the same format, basically. So, I mean, even with this data centralized, we still have a lot of problems. First of all, because, well, some PDFs we cannot read, mostly because the industry makes it difficult for us to read it, because they definitely don't want us to be doing what we are doing. So typically they would use PDFs that contain only images and no text, so that you cannot extract data from it. And even like that, they would put watermarks on it, or they would use a very low resolution, so that the automated reading of these files are not working. In some cases, they also don't respect at all. I mean, the FPI Transparency Initiative defines a format, but it's hard to say if it's voluntarily or not, but they don't respect the format. They change one column, or they change the order of the blocks, and basically it makes it super hard to read it in an automated way, which is what we need, because at the moment I think we passed 360 PDFs now. Oh, more than that. 360 per year, so like 900 in total. So it's and of course it's not working perfectly, so we know that we have holes in our data, but also basically in the academic research, they say garbage in, garbage out. Basically, we know that the data that we gather is far from perfect, and actually very far from perfect. Especially because of what I said, because there is not the name of every doctor we are in, because some of them don't want their name published, so they are published only in an aggregated line. But also because, this entire initiative is basically made to not be really usable. So, for example, the categories in which the links of interest are disclosed are very vague, and each company publishes their own methodological note to explain the choices that they've made. But of course, it means that in our data, if you make the sum of one category, you're summing apple and bananas, basically. So, and we know it. That's why we are not really focusing on publishing the data to the public, because the data has too many problems so that it can really be used by the public directly. But definitely what we want is to be a database, to offer a database that researchers and journalists can use to investigate their stories. So what are the outcome of this project so far? Well, we have the data, so that's already a good outcome. And then we are working with 2 sociologists who worked a lot on on the UK data of this FPI initiative, because in the UK the data was already centralized, so it was much easier to access than in other countries. And it's very good because they have a lot of experience of basically analyzing this data. And so we are for now working on 2 scientific publications that are hopefully going to arrive in the next months or so. And then basically, I mean, for now we are focusing very much on these scientific publications, but basically what we would want is to take part in journalistic projects. Sadly, this data is data that is in its very nature quite hard to make use of, because all the things that you will want to do, you know, from the first instinct are not that great because the data is not that great. For example, in a country, if you look at who's the doctor who receives most payment, well, actually, you probably don't see it because it's very likely that this doctor doesn't put his name in the data. So we have to find clever ways to basically interrogate this data. And for that, we also want to work with people that can either correlate our data to other data, or that can look at interesting things. For example, in Germany, and hopefully we'll do the same for France and Spain at least, we have students that are working about the influence of the pharma industry in the health study, that are looking at the situation of the deans, so the head of each health university. And they are looking at whether they publish the information or not, and if so, what they have. But the fact that a dean of a university is not publishing their information about the links of interest is already an information, and you can report on this. And in Germany, I mean, we're not done yet, but it's the vast majority of them who don't publish the data. I find it very incredible. So this is then something that you use to make a story and basically reach the public indirectly.
Oh, look, 2 more minutes.
Okay, I think we'll be right in time. What we see is that sadly this FPI initiative is very successful in preventing sunshine laws to be voted in Spain, in Europe. And basically so the example of Belgium for that is very sad. It's a clear win for FPR, so to speak. So basically there was the FPI initiative, and Belgium wanted to make a law to make it mandatory for the doctors to publish. But basically what they did is they said, oh, we will take the FPI initiative and just make it mandatory, so not require the consent of doctors. And they let basically the trade group in Belgium to deal with the data, and they actually even make the website is managed by the trade group. And you can see that because, so you have a website, you can set the name of a doctor, but you have no overview, and all the data is published as images with a watermark that makes them super damn to aggregate. So for it's one country that we still haven't done, although it's one of the countries where there is a law. So, I mean, this is clearly not practical transparency. We cannot use the data in any way we want. So, I mean, sadly, this initiative is successful. And that's my last slide. So the next step for us are, as I said, the scientific publications, and then basically working with either journalists or activists or researchers. So I guess in the audience here is mostly people from Chile, so I don't think you will have a lot of interest in the data. But if you know of any project that could use our data, we will be very happy to share it with people. You can just contact us. Thank you very much for inviting me and giving me the opportunity to present the project.